In my experience, I never really saw Steve doing much of anything in the garage. He was kind of always on the phone in the kitchen.
Would you ever think back then that it could become what it is right now?
Oh no, of course not.
Not at all.
Very surrealistic. I built the prototypes of the Macintosh.
The most legendary.
My dream job was I got to build the prototypes of the Apple III because that was the great computer that everybody wanted.
And then you have so many people working on it. How do you keep the secret, correct?
Yes. Which actually leads us into why Steve became so completely totalitarian and secretive. It was this late summer. We were at the farm for the apple harvest, and we decided to fast on apples for the whole week. There's a lot of completely free apples that have a worm in them. You can't sell them.
You wouldn't eat the worms, though.
No, you cut out the worms. Okay, the trivia is, what was the number 2 choice of a name?
Hello, Valley Talks viewers. In this 3rd season of Valley Talks, we're talking startup branding, and we're kicking off bold with the biggest and the most valued tech giant in the world, Apple. Founded in 1976, Apple is now worth nearly $1 trillion. Undoubtedly, throughout those years, Apple's brand has remained one of its kind, and it has stolen hearts of hundreds of millions of people. Today, at the lovely DocuSign office, I'm thrilled to speak with Daniel Kottke, one of the first Apple employees and Steve Jobs' college friend. Daniel was there from the earliest of Apple days. Or rather, should I say, Steve Jobs asked him whether he wouldn't want to be involved in a hobbyist computer project, and so he agreed. Daniel, thank you so much for joining me on Valley Talks. I'm so thrilled to have you.
Happy to be here.
Cool. So, hobbyist computer project. Is that correct way to put it? Did Steve really ask you, invite you to be involved in the project? What's the story?
You're asking about the Apple I, 40 years ago, last year. It's accurate to say the Apple I was a hobbyist computer project. Woz was a fanatical hobbyist. And Steve Jobs didn't seem like a hobbyist at all.
At all. He was having a big vision.
The funny thing about, no, he didn't have a big vision.
Okay.
No.
So not
well, he had a secret big vision.
Yeah, okay.
I didn't know that till much later. But Steve and I became friends in 1972 as freshmen in college. We went to India in 1974. 1975, I came back to California to visit him, and we went to this apple farm,
orchard,
communal farm. But 1975 was also the year of the Altair, which was the first hobbyist computer. And that led to the Homebrew Computer Club, and Woz was at the very first meeting and at every meeting. And that's really where the Apple computer came from, because all those people were doing projects, either building Altairs or building MSIs, or there were many other models. Like you could imagine in the early days of cars, there were lots of models. And Steve had never, in the 4 years I knew him, electronics never came up. Not really at all. And actually, now in '74, he had started working for Atari, building video games.
Yes.
Actually, I think in 1975, he took me to Atari, and I applied for a job.
Okay.
But I knew nothing, and they didn't hire me. But
well, Steve wasn't there for long anyway, too.
That's right. He wasn't there for long.
Yeah. Okay. So you joined Steve early, in the earliest days of now what we know is Apple, which not necessarily had the brand maybe back then. I want to talk about this in a second for sure. But also looking now, Apple is the most valued company in the world, nearly $1 trillion.
Until Amazon passes.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Until, yes. But I have to ask you right from the beginning, comparing those times, would you ever think back then that it could become what it is right now?
Oh no, of course not.
Not
It's
at all.
very surrealistic. Let's see, the first employees of Henry Ford building cars. Well, I don't know. The world is quite amazing.
Oh, yes.
The whole technology trajectory is just really amazing. Amazing times we live in.
Oh, for sure. I have my own story when it comes to the beginnings of Apple, because actually I was born on April 1st.
1976?
Not the same year. Not the same year. A little later. But also the same date. I love this date. My favorite of the year. All Fool's Day
April
also.
Fool's Day, yes.
So I have my little connection to the beginning of Apple as well, you know, which I found out about later, but yeah, still.
Now, whose idea was that? Steve Wozniak's probably. He was the prankster.
Prankster, of course.
Steve Woz is an inveterate prankster.
Is he still?
He is still, yes. And he loves to tell stories about his pranks.
Okay, I gotta have him on Valley Talks too. Then.
You would be lucky. He charges $100,000 to come and tell stories, but...
Well, we have common origin. He has some Polish origin.
Yes,
So,
that's right.
maybe.
That's a good angle. You could work that angle.
Maybe, who knows?
And I'm about to do my roots journey into
Oh, yes.
Poland,
Oh,
so
that's
I'm going to
awesome.
have to talk to Steve Wozniak about that.
Oh, well, I'd love that. Yes, you're going to Poland for the first time. That's very exciting. Because of your ancestor, your
My great-grandfather,
great-grandfather.
thanks to Google Blogs, I found little bits of information.
Yeah, that's super exciting. I hope you love it. You were one of the first employees of Apple, and then depending how you count this, whether it's on a contract.
Good memory, that's right.
Yes.
I'm either the first or the second or the third or the fourth.
Or the fourth, yes.
Or the 12th.
Yes, but since you are Steve Jobs' college friend, then you were there from the earliest days. But tell me about the garage story. You're candidly joking that you're the only one working in the garage. How comes that? Tell me about
Pretty well. When I arrived, Steve's sister Patty was plugging chips onto the boards on the coffee table in the living room while she watched television. Okay, so that's not the best recipe for building computers. And Steve's father had set up Steve's father worked on cars. So he had lots of tools in his garage. He was restoring cars. He was a very innovative, entrepreneurial person. But he was very supportive of his son's business project. And so he had set up a lab area in the garage. In my experience, I never really saw Steve doing much of anything in the garage. He was kind of always on the phone in the kitchen. Or
cooking or preparing food.
We didn't cook much, but we lived on carrots and dates and almonds.
And apples?
A few apples, yeah. Well, Steve was into the fruitarian diet.
Yes.
Anyway, so I was in the garage mostly by myself, building the Apple I's, and Steve would leave for errands, and then it was my job to run and answer the phone when the phone rang.
Oh, yes, because the phone was in the kitchen. You couldn't move it much.
Yes. Steve had a full-time job on the calculator team at Hewlett-Packard, and he loved his job, and he was not quitting his job.
Yep.
So, but he just loved building things. And so he had this Apple I, and even by the time we were selling the Apple I, he had already built the Apple II. So it was a foregone conclusion the Apple I was not going to sell very well because the Apple II was way better. It had color graphics, it had sound, it had joysticks, you could play games on it.
Got it. But I mean, even now, it is a little tricky because whenever companies release something, they already have something newer being done, right? So, and then they just don't.
It's a very tricky thing to do.
Tricky thing not to.
Don't want to ruin your product with a newer product.
Yeah, and then you have so many people working on it. How do you keep the secret, correct?
Yes,
so it's wild.
Which actually leads us into why Steve became so completely totalitarian and secretive. Once once he came back to Apple, he knew how bad leaks can be. because the moment people hear about the new cool thing, they don't want to buy the older thing. And that's a very serious business issue.
Thing,
and so in Apple's defense, I was the person who thought this is ridiculous. Why does it all have to be such a military secret? But really, it's a very understandable business consideration.
Wasn't he like that from the very beginning?
No, he totally wasn't. Although, okay, so Woz is the one who wants everything to be open, right? So Woz insisted that the schematics and the code for the Apple be public. Now, on the Apple II, the big topic was, because the Apple II had 8 slots, and it was such a popular computer that people were plugging in lots of different cards, and the cards had different software that ran with them, and the result was the whole computer became unreliable because you never knew what was in the other slots. And you can kind of, I don't have to explain that anymore, but that's why when the Macintosh was coming out, it had security screws so nobody could open it. And that was a good strategy, and it made the machine very reliable because there were what was inside the box was known completely. There was, right?
Yeah.
And
that was so different too.
Yeah, and the public didn't really appreciate that. But
it kind of still stayed like this, that, Apple is very closed.
Yes, well, you have to do that to be reliable. Now, when you compare Android phones with Apple phones, there's a reason why we love the reliability of the Apple phone.
Which one do you have? Apple phone?
Oh, of course, Apple phone. But, Android has its place in the world.
Yes.
Android is far and away the most successful in terms of units.
Times are changing, and the open source is becoming actually, more and more important. So,
yes.
And especially now in the blockchain era, this is just all like crazy.
That's kind of really what I'm dealing with in my smart home server project, is to use open source as much as possible. But the thing about open source is you get what you get. It's not necessarily what you want.
Yeah, true. All right, let's go back to Apple.
All right.
Apple brand, because that's definitely something.
Apple brand. Okay.
That's something I want to talk about. We have this new season on startup branding, and I'm so excited to kick it off with Apple.
Right.
That's amazing. You have your own really awesome story and a fun story about the Apple name, actually, because you went with Steve to the Apple farm, and just tell the rest of it, please.
Well, it was called All One Farm. It was a commune, a hippie commune in the 1970s.
And so you went there with Steve?
Yeah, Steve and I went there.
1975, was that?
Yeah. I think we probably visited there in 1974 also.
Because Apple name is from the apple fruit, obviously. So
yes, and Steve was maybe not obsessed is the right word, but he was intrigued by the mucusless diet healing system books, which is still interesting. Arnold Ehret was a healer in the 1920s. So he wrote the book Rational Fasting, which is still a completely valid idea, right? Now that we have an obesity epidemic, more people can consider fasting. At the time when it was this late summer, we were at the farm for the apple harvest. And we decided to fast on apples for the whole week as an interesting experiment, because actually when you're harvesting apples, there's a lot of completely free apples that have a worm in them. You can't sell them.
Yeah.
So it was just free. And
you wouldn't eat the worms though.
no, you cut out the worms. But
so how did that fasting go for that week?
it's not a good diet.
No,
I would say.
because it's a lot of sugar.
Yeah, it's just sugar. And so really your blood sugar is going up and down and up and down. That's not really a great diet.
Right. So the name for Apple is inspired by the fruit after your trip to the apple farm, correct?
Yes.
So you were a part of that trip. So that's a huge piece of history.
Okay, the trivia is, what was the number 2 choice of a name?
I would need to think.
I told you.
Yeah.
The number 2 choice, if they didn't go with Apple,
Was the very electronic name?
Matrix Computer
Matrix
Company,
Computer,
which is
yeah.
a funny name now in light of the Matrix films. So
Yes.
the Matrix is kind of like the opposite. Apple is a
Exactly.
sunny, organic name,
Right.
and Matrix is now you think of the dark.
Yeah, so Steve was voting for the Apple name, or he didn't know which name to choose, or how
I don't
did
know
that
what the
look?
number 3 choice was, but I think I don't know. Woz is a very playful person, so I could imagine Apple appealed to Woz also. And actually, Ron Wayne was the 3rd founder.
Yes.
Ron did the graphics for the logo, and he wrote the manual, and he did the schematics. I don't know that he had an opinion on the name.
So what about other people in your network, or people who were already knowing about Apple? How did they react to the name of the brand, Apple?
Oh, well, at the
How
time...
did it resonate with people?
Oh, I don't think there was much reaction at all.
It was just fine.
Yeah.
Okay. Because, from even now, from like thinking about like branding your own startup, you think whether I want to go with the trend or I want to go against the trend. Where should the inspiration come from? And I think it's just, it doesn't really matter that much in the beginning.
Doesn't matter that much.
And then, so Steve worked at Atari, and he did joke a little about that. He wants to have the new name, like that would be before Atari in the phone book, correct?
Maybe, yes.
That was one of the reasons.
That's something to think about.
Yeah, so when I heard that story, I was thinking like, how smart he was to think about like the earliest of SEO, as you could say today, like, search, how do you search for a company? So,
well, because Steve was thinking like a marketing person, because he was the marketing person.
he was strategic.
And actually the first ever place where the Apple I was for sale was the People's Computer Company in Menlo Park, PCC. And in fact, I just read this in the Draper book. This on the train up here. Before the Homebrew Computer Club even started, at the People's Computer Company, they were getting together for dinner every Wednesday night. I never knew that. That's like the roots before the roots.
So when it comes to the Apple brand, it has always had this simplicity at its core, right? Even until now, pretty much.
Yes.
And the simplicity, functionality, and so according to Walter Isaacson's book, Steve's biography, Steve was actually inspired by the simplicity of the house he was living in, which actually was, do you know that story? Which actually was the architecture of the house where he lived in was inspired by an early architect in the 90s.
You're talking about the Eichler houses?
Yes.
Yes. Which actually puzzled me because the house on Chris Drive, which is where the garage was, that was not an Eichler.
Yep.
And Steve had lived there all the way through high school.
Okay.
But maybe when he was younger,
Yes.
he had lived in an Eichler.
That's where his inspiration was from, to keep it simple, functional.
Yes. That makes a little bit of sense.
Okay. So it would mean that he was really thoughtful about this from the very beginning. Like, did you have that idea starting working at Apple, that Steve wanted it to be simple and, the messaging and the look and everything? Or was it like, did it
No,
come?
because, well, at the time of the Apple I, it was really just about functionality. The Apple I didn't even have a case at all. It was, it was really only for hobbyists. With the Apple II, that's when Steve was thinking about selling to consumers, not hobbyists. And so the early ads for the Apple II pictured the Apple II on the kitchen counter, and Susie Housewife is looking up her recipes on the Apple II.
Yeah.
So that was the...
Yeah, okay, so it came a little later, but it
Yes.
makes sense because with the first one you really test, you really figure out what the product is or what the demo of the product is, correct?
Right.
And actually you worked on the first prototypes of Apple II and Macintosh, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Those were years apart.
Yes, years and years apart. But today,
I actually
Macintosh is...
never, once I started working full-time at Apple, the original Apple II prototype disappeared. Like, I never ever saw it. I saw it in 1976 in a shoebox, because Woz would carry it around in a cardboard box. And he claims it was destroyed in a fire, he thinks. So I didn't build prototypes of the Apple II.
Okay.
I was just the production technician.
Okay.
I built the prototypes of the Macintosh.
The most legendary one.
And actually, no, my dream job was I got to build the prototypes of the Apple III, which was very exciting because that was the great computer that everybody wanted. We thought it would be wildly successful because it, you know, the Apple II had a number of limitations. And so we took all the things that people wanted to add to the Apple II and built it all into the Apple III. And that was very exciting.
And then you didn't get to work on it.
Well, the Apple III was a complicated project. It's not quite fair to say it was a huge failure, but it was a failure in the marketplace anyway, for a variety of reasons.
Got it. So Daniel, we don't have much time left, although I would want to talk with you about all those stories. We would definitely be sitting here like for days and talking for sure. I would be just listening actually and just want to hear.
Well, here, let me just say one more thing.
Yeah.
Since you're asking about branding, I can remember very clearly the day the Apple logo first showed up.
Okay.
Okay. Now, we had an Apple, so we had the Ron Wayne drawing of Newton sitting under the apple tree, which was kind of 18th century art, and that was not really the right feeling. So, and I don't remember, we sold the computers in brown boxes. There was no printed box. We had a manual, and it just had a black apple with a bite taken out of it, okay? But then, one day, someone showed up with a brochure with the rainbow stripes on the apple. And that was a branding genius, genius move. And I think, in my memory, it was black, solid black apple first, and the color bars came later. But because Apple was a color graphics machine, it made perfect sense. And I think Apple did very well with that rainbow logo over the years. That was a really smart idea. And I remember thinking when I first saw that, wow, this company could actually do well. This looks appealing.
You see?
Right?
And it did.
It's the power of branding.
Yeah, and it did. Thank you so much for sharing this. So when you look at Apple now, at the huge spaceship office.
Oh my God.
You know, it has actually taken over all of the Cupertino.
Yes.
Like all of the world.
Yes.
And pretty much so many offices, stores.
Not unlike Ford taking over Detroit.
No. Yeah. So how do you feel now and what do you think when it comes to Apple?
Oh, it's just all like science fiction, really.
You cannot actually realize like what really happened, right? Like how big it became. Like it's probably just...
It's very surrealistic.
Yeah, very surrealistic.
As many aspects of our technology world are very surrealistic. The genetics work that's going on is just like science fiction.
Yeah.
And spaceships to the moon, and hyperloops, and blockchain, nanotechnology, it goes on and on.
Do you
and on.
visit Apple offices at times? Like...
I go for lunch with various friends from time to time. I haven't been to the big spaceship yet. I look forward to it.
Yeah.
Actually, we tried to go. It wasn't even open yet, so we couldn't.
Well, now you have your own new venture in the smart home system.
I have a vision.
A vision.
I have a vision.
Not a venture yet.
It's a vision that's turning into a concept for a venture.
Okay.
No, there is a concept for a venture. It's at the prototyping stage, fair to say.
Got it.
It's been stuck on that stage for a few years.
Got it. Are there any lessons or any practices from your early Apple days that that's an obvious question that just comes to my mind that you would use now?
I would say, speaking to entrepreneurs in general, it is true that when I'm in my little closet room building a prototype, you have to start with a prototype.
Yep.
Okay? Not all companies start with a prototype. Nowadays, many people have an idea and they go to a hackathon and they make a little app and then they try and raise money. But I'm old school in the sense that I believe you should have your prototype first.
Yeah.
Before you try to sell it.
Yeah. So some people have something, really small and they raise money right away. Other people actually want to build the product right away and go to market with. They think it's so genius, right? Which isn't actually also.
Well, look at the business model of Amazon, which has been wildly successful. Amazon never had a profit for its first 20 years. They priced everything so low that there was no profit at all.
I remember I got my dictionary for $1.
It all went into growth of the business. So I think the business lesson is clear that is a perfectly good approach. It kind of depends what business you're in.
Yeah.
Now, SpaceX couldn't work that way. To do outer space, you have to have a lot of funding to begin with.
For sure.
Anyway.
Well, so I wish you at least as much success as Apple has with your new venture.
Well, that's a very optimistic and kind thought. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for joining me on Valley Talks. It's been a huge pleasure to have you here.
Okay. Hope
Thank you.
that was entertaining.